Turn with me to Genesis chapter 26. Genesis 26, and I'm going to read about half of it today. Just need to so you get the full gist of the story. We'll begin with verse 1. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and will give your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring all nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." So Isaac settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, "She is my sister," for he feared to say, "my wife," thinking lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of the window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah, his wife. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Behold, she's your wife. How then could you say she is my sister?" Isaac said to him, "Because I thought lest I die because of her." Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might have easily lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, "Whoever touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." And Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. And he had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father. And Abraham said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we." So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. And Isaac dug the wells of the water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had stopped after the days of the death of Abraham. And he gave the names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there was a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The well is ours." So he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. And I think I will stop there. I don't know why it is, but it is. I think in a lot of cases, sometimes it's hard to be a son, and sometimes it's hard to be a dad. I don't know why that relationship, sometimes the dynamics of that relationship is difficult, but sometimes that it is. And I think it's especially tough when dad is a legend, or an icon, or a pillar in the community. Sometimes it's kind of hard for the son to escape that shadow. And that's what we have here with Isaac. Isaac's father, Abraham, he's legendary. And then Isaac's son, Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel come from him. There's a lot written about Abraham in Genesis. There's even more written about Jacob, just a little bit about Isaac. And I think Isaac gets overlooked an awful lot and just kind of considered of the patriarchs kind of the minor patriarch. And he seems to get overlooked and ignored. And I want to present to you, Lord willing, a more rounded man. And a man that I think we can learn a few things. And here's what I see in Isaac's life. And the first thing that I see is his fear. His fear. Let's look at that obviously. He had a fear for his personal safety. That resulted in his lying about his relationship with Rebekah. It's hard to know if his fear was justified because there's no real overt threat. I mean, people asked about, Rebekah, but there's nothing recorded that tells us that his life was in danger. Nevertheless, he felt pressure. And that pressure kicked in the survival instinct, and it took over his emotional state, and he was willing to use his wife as a scapegoat to save his own skin. It was not a noble moment in his life, but he comes clean with it. And it's interesting because his sin, his place of stumbling here, mirrored that of his father Abraham. And Abraham stumbled in this point before Isaac was even born. I don't know if Isaac heard the story when he was growing up, but it is interesting to see how stumbling points in parents have a way of turning up in our children. You know, we're all vulnerable to the temptation of self-preservation. Fear is a powerful emotion. It can cause us to become paralyzed emotionally and keep us from doing those things that are right and in our best interest. The antidote to this is trust. The Christian life is not a life without fear. It's not. Someone's saying, well, I don't fear anything. They're not being honest with you or themselves. It is a life that doesn't give in to the fear, but instead submits it to God and places it in his hands. John Wayne, this is Layton's paraphrase. I can't get it exactly right, but John Wayne was reported to say, courage isn't a lack of fear, it's having fear but saddling up anyway. And that's really true. There are 365 verses in the Bible that say, fear not. One for every day. It's okay to be afraid. It is. Just don't let it consume you. Take that fear and place it in the hands of God. The second thing I see is his hearing or his listening. I see here a man who listens to God. There's a famine. Like his father, he starts heading his way toward Egypt. God tells him to stop, and he does. Doesn't make sense, because as rich as he is, as powerful as he is, he doesn't have the means to provide for his household and all those who work with him. So he's making his way there, but God tells him to stop, and he listens. If I were a betting man, I would bet, and I'm not, but if I were, I would bet you a hot fudge sundae he remembered God's miraculous provision on Mount Moriah more than 20 years earlier. You know, fellas, it's important for us to count our blessings, to remember from where we have come. It's important to look back, not live in the past, but it's important to look back and see those times where we were not up to the occasion. We did not have the resources, and yet God moved, and He worked, and He blessed, and He met the needs. It's important that we take those trips back there so that because those memories will sustain us during the lean seasons of life. In listening to God, I believe that Isaac learns how to deal with adversity and with enemies. He knows how to let things go. When I read about this incidents with the wells, where the Philistines tell him to go, and he digs these wells and people try to take him over, and he pulls away and he moves, commentators have taken that and said, well, he's weak. He's a pushover. He's a doormat. I don't see that at all. Remember, Abraham had his own private army of over 300 men, plus livestock, plus servants. Isaac inherited all of that. He is a rich and powerful man. He can take on his enemies if he wants to and win. But instead, he displays a meek nature. Now, meekness is not weakness. They rhyme together, and so people just assume that they mean the same thing. They do not. Meekness is strength under control. It is a manifestation of godly character. And when the Philistines order him to leave, he does. He could have fought. He chooses not to. So he leaves. He digs a well. Others come to take it. He calls it Esek, and he moves on. The name Esek means strife or conflict. He moves on because he chooses not to have his life filled with conflict. Drama queens are self-absorbed. They are narcissistic. It's all about them. And they ain't limited to just the ladies. Here's the lesson. Humbly, quietly, Isaac cuts them loose. He moves on with his life. He builds another well. Others come to take it. He names it Sitnah, and he moves on. Sitnah means hatred. One sure way to inspire jealousy and hatred in others is for God to shower you with blessings and success. But if we live our lives with hatred, it hinders our prayer. It dries out the spirit. It leads to bitterness, and it sours and it hollows us out in our soul, and it ruins us. Isaac isn't going to let his life be defined by that. He lets it go, and he moves on. I see in Isaac, third, I see his forgiveness. I see a man who knows how to forgive. Later in chapter 26, Isaac's enemies come to see him. They realize that God is with Isaac, and it's better for them to make peace and be friends rather than to remain enemies. Now, when they came to Isaac later in this chapter, we're not really sure on the timeline. Months, perhaps years could have passed from the time that he abandoned those wells. Could have been. But the thing is, Isaac had not forgotten what they did to him. But he's able to come to terms with the past. He's able to forgive and make peace. Because of the unpleasant nature that it brings, we tend to view conflict negatively. We wonder, why is this happening to me? We tend to shy from it, and that's a natural response. It really is. But we need to realize and see that because of that conflict, God moved Isaac from Gerar to Esek, to Sitnah, to Rehoboth, however you pronounce that. because that's where God wanted him to ultimately be. It wasn't a sin for him to be in Gerar or those other places. There's nothing wrong with those places. It just wasn't where God ultimately wanted him. So God brought conflict in his life to get him to move. Human nature being what it is, as long as we are comfortable, we are content to remain as we are. So God will use adversity to move us physically, emotionally, spiritually, to bring us to where he wants us to be. The Apostle Peter wrote this in his first letter. Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you. What do we do when conflict comes? We say, why is this happening to me? Peter says, don't question that. But rejoice, inasmuch as you are partakers in Christ's sufferings, that when his glory shall be revealed, you may be glad with exceeding joy. If you're reproached for the name of Christ, you're happy, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. On your part, he's evilly spoken of, but on their part, he is evilly spoken of, but on your part, he's glorified. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, or as a thief, or as an evildoer, or as a busybody in other men's matters. Yet if any man suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on this behalf. For the time is come that judgment must begin at the house of God. And if it first begin with us, what shall the end be of them that do not obey the gospel of God? And if the righteous scarcely be saved, what will happen to the ungodly and the sinner? Wherefore, and here's the verse, let them that suffer according to the will of God. That's a mouthful. Wherefore, let them who suffer according to the will of God commit the keeping of their souls to him in well-doing as unto a faithful Creator. Sometimes it ain't the devil. Sometimes it ain't the world. Sometimes it is God who brings us into our lives again to move us to where we need to be. And then finally, I see his thriving. Isaac shows us how to handle success. He was the kid born with a silver spoon in his mouth, and yet it didn't go to his head. He inherited a fortune on top of what God and on top of that, God blessed him. It said in that 1 year, he reaped 100-fold of what he had sown. In other words, what he received from his dad was just a fraction of what he ended up with. And yet with all of this wealth, this power, this influence and prosperity, he listens to God's voice. Instead of going to Egypt, instead of taking matters into his own hands, he stays in Palestine. He could have gone anywhere, but he remains in the land where God has placed him. He is committed to God's purpose. Second, he never uses his wealth maliciously. He had the resources to destroy his enemies and his rivals. Instead, he exercises humility, grace, and class. And third, he recognizes the source of his wealth. It all comes from God. When he gets to Rehoboth, I think that's how you pronounce it, the place where God ultimately wants him to be, he recognizes that God has brought him there. He recognizes through all the conflict, all the strife, all the things that have gone wrong, he was actually where God wanted him to be. And so like his father, he builds an altar there, openly worshiping God who has provided for him. He recognizes from whom it all comes. Rehoboth means room to stand. It is a place where one may become established. God has a place for each and every one of us. Some people find that place early in life. Others, like me, we come to it later. A well is a source of life. It's a means of resource of blessing. And so for some people, the well that they have that God has provided is deep. For others, it's not. But regardless of your well's depth and location, we need to remember that that is God's gift to us. Our homes, our families, our businesses, our wealth, it all comes from his hand. Yes, you may have sacrificed and worked very hard, knowing you as I do, there's no doubt that you did. But our knowledge, our skill, our ability, our opportunities, they all come from God. I hear people say, well, if I want to, I don't hear it so much anymore, but I've heard people in the past say, well, if I won $1 million, I'd give 10% to the church. Well, you know, God isn't worried about that. He isn't. What he does care about is what you're doing with what you got right now. Your time, your talents, your treasure. Are we stewards of the life that God has given us? Deuteronomy 8 says, beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth. Proverbs 3 says, honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all you produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. Although he was the son of a legend, Isaac became a man in his own right, and a great man at that. And his is a life, and his is a character from whom we can all learn and follow in his example.